that level of like team rivalry, that level of you really gotta like undercut other people that you really should be collaborating with is something that has to be disrupted on its head.
To create the psychological safety, to get people to enjoy taking care of the team and fostering an incredible culture within the organization. Fantastic. That to me, I'm on board. I'm afraid when I'm looking at the market share, I'm looking at our competitors, I'm looking at the things that you've been saying around like we got to chill a bit more. That's how I perceive it, right? I'm like, oh my God, she's asking me to work less, do less. And I'm like, but I need to capture market share. We have a burning vision. I still have that resistance. When that resistance comes up, what's the counter argument, and how can I be sold on the opposite?
How do you define success? Are we building for like 1 to 2 years, or are we building for 5 to 10 to 50 years, right?
I think this is where I'm noticing for a lot of public companies, they're stuck
They are.
because they have to do their quarterly reporting,
They do.
and you're evaluated against that. Welcome back, everybody, to the Jason Marc Campbell podcast. I'm very excited about the conversation we're going to have today, which brings forward an idea I've always had at my heart. As you know, I wrote a book around selling with love, and I've always seen love as an energy we want to bring into the workplace. And when you start looking at how businesses operate, there's a lot of zero-sum games, dog-eat-dog ideology. And what I've always wanted to see is a world where we can actually start focusing more on solving what is the greater problems that we see as a humanity, and see how there can be a lot more space for collaboration, for companies to work together towards that problem, not creating things like false scarcity to outcompete, outwin. And although there is an essence of competition that exists within the marketplace, how can we bring up values that are of a higher tier that allows us to really see the world transform into a better place? And so the conversation we're going to have today is going to be a very exciting one. I have Ruchika T. Malhotra, who is joining me and is the author of the upcoming book, Uncompete, Rejecting Competition to Unlock Success. And I'm very excited about this conversation because I want to see, is there a world that can exist where competition isn't as fierce, where there's a larger pie that's focused on really solving some big issues around the world that we see and would love to see solved? She is the founder of Condor, which is an inclusion strategy practice and global consulting firm, and she's been working with organizations around the world to really help them look at how they work with teams, how they set their strategies into a much more inclusive way. She's also the author Inclusion on Purpose, which was MIT Press top-selling book of 2022 and has been called transformative by Dr. Brené Brown. She's a former business journalist, and she is now here on the show. It's a pleasure to see you, Ruchika. Pleasure to have you on the show.
Jason, thank you so much for having me.
So I've given you my intention. I do feel that I've always had this wish that there could be room for more focus around the problem. And I'd be curious around, what are your intentions that you had before putting this book together?
I love this. I mean, like you, I think I see, and I would say I have always been nervous around the word love. And in fact, even in Uncompete, I talk about the importance of joy, of peace, of rituals, even some level of spirituality. But I'm careful about love. But the more I got familiar with your work, and for folks who are really talking about the importance of love in the workplace, it makes so much sense, and it's so much at the heart of what Uncompete is, right? And what Uncompete, really the philosophy is that there's abundance, there's more than enough for all of us to succeed if we can operate from the paradigm that competition, winner take all, zero sum scarcity isn't the way to get ahead in life. So my intention is to figure out, actually, how do we bring the idea of love into Uncompete? I think it's at the core. I haven't kind of had this conversation about this sort of intersection. So that's what I'm really excited to do today.
I would assume that there's a certain level of fear that must come up for an organization that is already operating from the paradigm that we must win at every cost and we must outcompete with every other organization. When you introduce this idea to these organizations, what are some of the first reactions that happen?
Well, I actually think the fear is what drives the competitive sort of mindset. At the heart of that is fear and insecurity. At the heart of that is, are we going to be irrelevant? what do we need to dominate? What do we need to be better than everyone else? And I think the the idea of uncompete in the beginning can feel a little bit counterintuitive, especially when you think about longevity and success. But the more you peel back the layers, the more I talk to leaders about, like, what does it actually look like, right? Like, am I saying to a leader, like, "Oh, close down your company and don't do, don't have the aspiration to deliver value, to deliver great products, to create great, customer experiences." That's not what uncompete is, right? What I'm trying to say is to be the best version of what you're already trying to do. Don't operate from the fear, the scarcity, the winner take all, the idea that, like, you constantly have to be on and dominating. In fact, you can deliver so much of those values that you believe in and that you want to aspire to if you don't operate from that scarcity mentality.
I'd be curious to see what are some of the most frustrating things you do witness in a world or in an industry where you see that they are operating at the complete opposite of what you're proposing, where it's actually vicious competition. What is the ripple that happens that kind of makes it worse for everyone?
I mean, I've been thinking about this for a very long time. One of the secret aspirations I had, I'm always every few years my friends will remind me, like, "Hey, you could still do this." But my dream was really to be a corporate lawyer. There was a time, when I went into university, I was born and brought up in Singapore. I know we connected over that, knowing that you were based in Bali, and have lived in Southeast Asia for so long. But I was born and brought up in Singapore. Talk about a competitive society, which is very much sort of anchored around this concept that you got to be better than the others, otherwise you're going to be left behind. So when I went to university for sort of pre-law, because I knew I wanted to go to the U.S. to study law, and you can only do it as a postgraduate degree. I what I wanted to do was I was like, I this is it. Like, this is what I love to do. I'm really interested in, like, how markets and companies operate. I really believe, like, commercial law is like what my future is going to hold. For me, of course, life had other plans. I became the news editor of our student newspaper in London, which was, really fun and really cool and really subversive in many ways, and the sort of journalism bug bit me. I had always, loved writing stories and whatever it is, and so ended up not doing that. But I think about law so much right now. I think about the legal profession as one where it's ripe for this idea of disruption, because we see so many amazing lawyers and attorneys, and especially women, and especially people with young children, really burn out, because the idea is you got to be always on. You got to beat out everyone else. You got to beat out the people that you're working around. Otherwise, you become irrelevant. And so that level of, like, team rivalry, that level of, like, you really gotta, like, undercut other people that you really should be collaborating with, is something that has to be disrupted on its head, and it's very frustrating when I encounter that for sure.
So you have legal as one of those, I guess, need to evolve type of organizations. And obviously, this is going to bring some benefits for the people that are working in the field to be making it more accessible. I'd be curious to see, have you witnessed any law firm that has adopted the process, the kind of principles, and how has that helped them in
Yeah.
perhaps building better relationships with their clients and growing as well?
Yeah. I think that there are many more. I think the large ones are still definitely operate from the paradigm that you gotta work all the time at all costs, and you gotta be very vicious in what you do. But actually what I'm starting to find is a lot more of smaller, entrepreneurial, like, smaller firms based on this premise that, like, we're gonna collaborate with each other. We're gonna have specialists who do different things. We're gonna serve our clients in a different way. And I've definitely seen a lot more success and a lot more of this idea of just, like, we're great lawyers when we're working, and we can also have a very full life. And part of working for this organization are those values. And I think what's been interesting is then talking to so many more people like myself, who are also small business owners, who certainly I have chosen very deliberately to work with a small law firm like that. that serves business owners with that same mentality. Like, we're going to get your work done. We're going to be there for you when you need it. And we are not going to be like 24/7 on call. Right. And I really appreciate that level of understanding, because then when I work with attorneys at this firm, I'll always get the most like clear eyed, not overwhelmed version of them compared with when I have actually worked with some of the larger commercial law firms in some of my past lives.
So one thing that I think would be really cool is for anybody who's listening to this and their paradigm is singing with the idea that perhaps I can adopt this framework of uncompete. What are the first things that I should be looking at when I want to bring this ethos into my organization?
Mm. So I really broke down the book and the idea into sort of three parts. One is choice, the second is action, and the third, which again, depending on the firm, may feel uncomfortable, but resistance, right? And the choice aspect of it is around how much of this work begins with me, begins with I, begins with the individual leader, um, and really working to reset some of the paradigms we've long believed in, like things like we were hardwired to compete. And when I looked at research to question this, to see if if there's some scientific basis to the idea that as human beings we were somehow born to compete, it's in our DNA. I actually found no, that's not the case. A lot of evolutionary biologists and scientists are now saying no, we are so powerful and we have evolved so much in our history because we are so good at collaboration. So it's rethinking, for example, and in the book I name like these five myths that I think a lot of us have been conditioned with. I certainly was growing up in Singapore. If you don't compete, someone else will take this opportunity. It's just the way things are done. You always got to compete. So the first is that choice of like really asking, like, do I need to compete in this situation? Does our organization need to compete in this situation? What are the norms within our teams? Like, is our team very much built around like rivalry and not supporting each other? Or actually, do we already have sort of some of that in the water that we can continue to develop, right? So that's the choice piece. Then there's action. I think the action piece is where you really look at again, what are some boundaries that the organization and our culture sets around things like rest and around people being able to choose joy, for example, and having a full life out of work. What's it like? Do we have a culture which encourages feedback, which encourages openness, or is there work to be done around that? A lot of the opposite really lives in a very competitive environment, right? In a winner take all environment, which lacks psychological safety. What happens is people don't want to take risks. They don't want to fail. They're really scared of, speaking truth to power respectfully, of course. And so it's really about like, do we have a psychologically safe environment here or not, right? And what are some action steps we can do to do that? And then the resistance part is it is more as an individual leader, and that's the way that I've written the book. But from an organizational perspective, again, it's like talking about and really defining, and in many cases, redefining what does success look like. That is a key component of what I've written about when I talk about resistance. Because if I think about it as an individual, and then I kind of add that as a business owner, definitely things that have, like, resonated with me for a long time around success is, like, gotta be the best. We gotta, like, outwit everyone else. I'm only worthy if I'm producing. My team is only worthy if they're constantly raising the bar all the time. It doesn't matter how burnt out they are. And then so if we apply uncompete to sort of that framework, what you realize is, can we resist some of those norms and really define success for what's relevant to us right now?
You mentioned resistance. I'm going to tell you the
Mm,
resistance that comes up for me.
tell me.
I see your framework in being applied in an internal setting of an organization and then how you're positioning externally with your competitors in the market. I feel a lot less resistance when I start thinking about applying these concepts internally. I'm like, oh yeah, like, and this is something I think I bring a lot into the organization that I brought. I'm noticing words like peace, joy, and abundance, which makes me think perhaps you're familiar with the concepts of power versus force.
Oh, of
And
course.
okay, so we can go spiritual.
Yes,
And
definitely.
so I love these kinds of vibrations that you can bring into an internal team. You mentioned psychological safety, and it's so interesting because one of my clients, I just came in and we had, you know, a leader, or rather the founder of the organization, brilliant, talented, an artist. When he was forced to step into the organization, was like, oh my God, we need this now. He's got a burning vision of where he wants to take the organization, but a process of execution that wasn't best for managing teams. I came in and I brought, probably in some capacity, uh, ideas from Uncompete to create the psychological safety to get people enjoy taking care of the team and fostering an incredible culture within the organization. Fantastic. That to me, I'm on board. I'm afraid when I'm looking at the market share, I'm looking at our competitors, I'm looking at the things that you've been saying around like we got to chill a bit more. And I'm like, that's how I perceive it, right? I'm like, oh my God, she's asking me to work less, do less. And I'm like, but I need to capture market share. We have a burning vision. I still have that resistance. And so when that resistance comes up, what's the counter argument? And how can I be sold on the opposite?
Yeah. Great. I mean, great point. And I'll start with this. I will start with this caveat. There are a couple of things actually. One is, I've looked at the work of like the wonderful work of the founders of the Blue Ocean strategy, right? And it's this idea of like if you just go after markets, and if you only go after opportunities that have already been conquered, then you're constantly going to live in this like state of fear, and it's just not going to be as good for you versus seeking out new markets and new opportunities. And I think some part of like that fear of like we got to operate, where everyone else is operating and spread ourselves really thin and operate with scarcity. The reality is that doesn't always work, right? Most of the time it doesn't work. What does, and what I really draw a lot of inspiration from are companies like Patagonia, who have, their founders. Literally, I was reading, some of their work, and Yvonne Chouinard and Vincent Stanley in the book as well. I quote them. They talk about how important it was to prioritize profit, but not profit over planet. Prioritize doing the right thing that would ultimately make you profitable. And this is especially related to some of their more planet friendly products that they've put out. Patagonia, of course, is an outdoor retailer company. Um, and they literally wrote, we prioritize doing the right thing, which eventually made us profits, not just the next day. So I think the one of the challenges that we see with this sort of competition winner take all mentality is you think of short term, right? You look at the profits or you look at market share today and then for the next 1 month, rather than what can we do that will really allow us to sustain for 5, 10, 15, 50, 100 years. And I think that's the type of conversations that we need more leaders to be having. And I think, and I want to be honest, like I think when we live in such a shareholder driven market, and when we live when we live in a market that is constantly about profit, we do lose sight of the long term. And we've seen a lot of very successful companies that have had a huge amount of market share burn out within, 3 to 5 years because they just haven't been able to deliver on a long-term vision. So I think that's the big question, right? How do you define success? Does success in that, even in as it relates to external shareholder profit success, market share success, are we building for like the 1 to 2 years, or are we building for 5 to 10 to 50 years, right?
I think this is where I'm noticing for a lot of public companies, they're stuck
They are.
because they have to do their quarterly reporting
They do.
and you're evaluated against that.
There
As a
is so
private,
much work. Sorry, there is actual work being done. More and more experts are talking about how we need to do away with those quarterly reports in public companies because they do stifle innovation.
it becomes so hard for somebody to actually invest in a long-term vision at the cost of short-term gains. It would get them completely obliterated on the stock market, wouldn't it? And that is probably one of the biggest wastes and destructive and annoying things, that it must be so hard to have to deal with those pressures and not be able to have that kind of long term which makes me think it seems like private organizations are able to dance around this issue and be able to execute on things that are just coming from the left field. As you mentioned, a blue ocean strategy can actually be executed when you do not have those pressures. So it needs a leader who wants to see a vision, which takes along a lot of the values that I think you're sharing in your book, isn't it?
They do, Jason. And like, I think the other thing I want to say is a lot more, and it's hard, right? Like we are in a tough time. In the work I do around inclusion strategy, we have seen so much of challenge, especially here in the United States. Um, but I wanna remind people that your customers also vote based on their values, right? They make decisions, they make consumer decisions. We saw a huge, drop in fact, interestingly, both share price, market share, and actual growth, in Target after there was a huge after there were announcements of rollbacks on their efforts around equity and inclusion. What we're starting to see and what I think is becoming very clear is if you want to be there for the long term, a big part of it is you have to lead with your values. Again, short term, you may be like, oh, obliterating at all costs, no matter what. It's going to maybe allow you to succeed for a couple of years, maybe even a decade, right? But eventually, that's going to run its course. And the level of disaster you're gonna wage, in its wake, I think that's a question. That's where we need to come back to the fundamentals of what is your company there for, right? What are you really doing this work for? And I think so many of us, again, so much of competition and so much of what I'm trying to do with Uncompete isn't necessarily to say, like, never, don't ever compete. Competition is terrible. Competition is bad for you. Like, no. What I'm trying to say is, can we, for a moment, disrupt that automatic wiring that tells us no matter what, we got to compete? Can we stop for a second and ask ourselves, like, what are we actually winning in this sort of competition or in this game that we're doing? What are we losing? And does that align with our values? And I think that's one thing that even as I was writing the book and seeking examples, that I don't think enough, especially larger organizations, are able to do that. And that's where I think the rubber really meets the road.
As I was telling you before we hit record, is one of my pastimes on a long haul flight is to play sort of video games. And what I've been noticing in that industry is you have these publicly listed massive gaming companies that have such strict sales quotas they got to hit in their game, revenue targets. And you're seeing an entire backlash and boycott happening on certain organizations that crank their prices too high, or that show that they don't care about the customer, or they're doing microtransactions across the place to try to compete at every cost and to milk customers as much as possible. And you're seeing a trend where you get to know who's this small team, who's the leader behind it, what's the vision and the passion behind the product, why are they even building a game? Is it to make something that is fun, or are we just trying to recycle an asset and maximize shareholder value? Has gotten the entire industry or the consumer base be disenfranchised by the large organization and get them extremely passionate. We've seen runaway sales for these small studios that actually care. And I'm seeing that. I always love looking at that industry because it seems it's so forward as far as the technology cycle. They're usually doing things before the rest of the world's industries catch up. And I'm like, oh, if that's happening there, how is this going to happen in the personal growth industry, which is one that I'm much more close to? How is this going to trickle down into movie if it's not already happening, or and then it just slowly goes into these more traditional types of industries. So I feel that's where there's a huge shift, and it's already happening there. It's going to sweep up the rest of the world, that people are going to embrace this long term thinking and actually doing something because it matters.
I love that. I really hope so. And gaming is probably an industry I'm not as familiar with. And what I was starting to have conversations with a lot more people is, or, with people who are experts or who either work in the industry or who participate as gamers, is how much more work was being done in the last few years about making games so much more inclusive. So as women gamers are no, it's not a small number of people who identify as women who are gamers who did not want to participate in games that did not, for example, feel comfortable or safe for them. I think that a lot more of those norms are also what I started seeing in gaming that was exciting to see, and then also seeing those organizations, those companies doing really well as a result of that.
Yeah. It's interesting because that's a topic of debate in that industry, which I think there's a very big difference between doing those activities because it's part of your core values versus doing those activities because you think it's going to maximize your shareholder value.
Mhm.
And you've seen the backlash happen when it seems that the only reason that these elements of inclusions were there was just to, oh, let's check some boxes and satisfy the masses, as opposed to, no, we actually care about that. And I think that's something I'd love to open up on is where does it like we're looking at implementing ideas around uncompete. I'd be curious to know what is the difference between the energy of putting like applying your strategies just because I've heard it on a podcast and I should do it, or what are the real values I should be looking into how I operate and that I would want to bring this forward.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think it's really important to be able to sit down and name what are those values that are important to you, right? And if you wanna create, again, bringing it back to this idea of long-term thinking, you wanna create a customer base that is loyal to you. They turn to you because they have such a positive customer experience. They're excited by what you create. They're looking to you as the innovators. If that's truly where you're at, then indeed ideas like equity and inclusion, like Uncompete, right? Which is not winner take all. It's like, no, we want to create opportunities for as many people as possible to be involved in our in what we do. Those values are really important. If that's part of your values, then of course this makes so much sense. And if that isn't your value, if your value is nope, shareholder profit at all costs, growth at all costs, we don't care who gets obliterated out of the way, that's your values, and maybe these won't feel as applicable. So I wanna say that I wanna be honest, like, this may not be applicable to all. Now the challenge is, I think we're seeing also as newer technologies, I'm thinking specifically around artificial intelligence, as you build and you and some people, there's a fantastic book, The Empire of AI by Karen Howe, which looks at sort of the growth of OpenAI and how what started as truly this idea that like we need to make this very powerful technology collaborative. We need to be really open. That's why it was called OpenAI. We got to be very transparent. What happened when shareholder value and profit and the and what and actually the quality of the product suffered as a result of building really fast to try and make sure that the competitors didn't get there before. And following that journey as I'm reading this book, it's a New York Times bestseller, fantastic, is frightening, right? It's like when you think about like that, like what are your values? If you start your company with the value that like I believe in this amazing technology. I believe it'll change lives. I'm I'm bullish about some parts of AI. I'm really excited about technology that can, for example, detect breast cancer in imaging, 5 years earlier than what a normal, what a trained physician could look at that, radiologist could look at those same reports. It detects it 5 years early. Wow, like that is the type of technology that I would love to see more of, right? To compete so that you can have something that's like an image generator before your competitor. What tell me what is the value of that, right? And I think this is where we are fundamentally having this question, especially right now, especially where we see wealth inequality at these gigantic levels. It's like a huge chasm that we need to bridge. I think we're asking, what is the purpose of a company? What is the purpose of a leader? And how can we build something that is actually meaningful and impactful?
I'd love to leave you with a caveat is for anybody who is maybe shareholder value at all costs and are feeling most of the resistance and most of the rigidity, would you have some final words that could at least that open them up to the possibility that if I'd apply some of this framework long term, I'd be able to generate so much more value?
Hmm. But it's about the internal, and physical and physiological impact of what behaving and operating with that level of fear and that level of scarcity does to you in the long run. right? And I think there's clear examples, right? We have seen again chronic burnout, chronic health issues, chronic like challenges, like mental health challenges and anxiety, and I think that is one of the big epidemics that we're seeing. We're seeing a loneliness epidemic here in the United States, very different from, more collectivistic countries like, for example, in Southeast Asia. But we're seeing loneliness epidemics here in a lot of the Western countries because when you only focus on growth, when you only focus on outwitting your competition, you don't invest in collaboration and community. So what I'm saying is like your body is going to give out on you, right? So even if you're like, no, shareholder value matters the most, what's the point of doing that if you're not going to be able to enjoy it in the long run, right? When your body gives out on you, when your health gives out on you. And I think that is a core component of this, which again, in the short term, it's like, no, 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 I got to make my quarterly, numbers. In the long term, it's can I actually live a well enough life so that I can live to, be around for 10 more, business cycles or whatever it is.
Ruchika, I'm so glad we got to open up this topic, speak a little bit about it, and to maybe warm up the hearts for those who might be a little colder around the topic. And for those who already have this as a flame for themselves, that they've been wanting to get into a world that isn't so crazy competitive. My biggest thing that I take away from this conversation is that the longer term you think, the more you start thinking less about direct competition and more about the core problem that you want to solve, and also getting very clear on the values that you want to bring into an organization. I mean, this is something I speak about inside the company I'm working at right now, where every time I present the values, I try to bring up examples of how do we make decisions based on that. Because when you start thinking long term and these values actually guide your decisions, I feel like we start having a lot more harmony internally. And I have to admit, as we're having this conversation, I already started thinking, since, core of the work I'm doing now is within the breathwork industry, is like, how do I think of ideas and strategies that provide opportunities to unite the industry and solve the ultimate problem, which is reducing anxiety, healing, and making sure that people aren't overworked. And I think grabbing a copy of your book will at least get some people to realize that you cannot just operate competitive business at all costs where you completely burn yourself out. What's the whole point? And so for everybody tuning in, Uncompete has just come out. Rejecting competition to unlock success will be a great copy that you can pick up. We'll put a link into the show notes for you to go deeper. And I'd love to ask you one question that I used to ask all the time. And I'll ask it simply because you mentioned sales is not necessarily the department you've spent most of your time in, but I'll still ask you the question from someone who's a thought leader. What does selling with love mean to you?
Mm. Well, I will say I don't consider myself like a, workplace salesperson, but I realize that you're selling all the time, right? Like whether you're, I mean, you know this because you're the expert, but you're selling in your personal relationships, you're selling in your friendships, you're selling, right? And I know that some people could hear that and feel like a little awkward about it, right? Like, what does that mean? But for me, selling with love is really about creating community in a way that you can't it's like you believe that the other person really has your back. So it's about trust and it's about community, which I think is really at the core of what we're all seeking. I think of that of Oprah with this is a long-winded answer, and please forgive me, Jason, you can cut this out. But I think of that, I think of this interview with Oprah Winfrey years ago where she said, I have interviewed every single successful famous person in the world, from the Dalai Lama to every president to all of that, to Tom Cruise. And she said, literally, when they're done at being on my couch and on the couch and being interviewed, backstage, they'll turn to me and they'll say, "Was I okay? Was that all right? Did I do okay?" And we all wanna be validated, and we all wanna be held and believe like, wanna be in a place where we believe that we are in a relationship of trust, and for me, selling with love is about trust and community building.
I would say that was a perfect answer, and we will not
Thank
cut
you.
any of it. And I will thank you so much for your time, your wisdom, and your energy, and
You.
the ideas you bring to the world. As I mentioned at the start, I want to see more of these ideas be brought forward, and I'm glad you've put the book out so we can get a lot more people to uncompete and do business for solving the real problems. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Jason.
thank you for listening to the Jason Marc Campbell Business Podcast. If you enjoyed that episode and you want to dig deeper into other topics, we have some more episodes that we've linked here. Some of them are related to sales, other on business, and even some on being more productive at work. Whatever it is you're interested in, we have so many episodes that are being listed on this channel. So please dig in, enjoy, and of course, keep selling with love.